Convicted murderer Kevin Crum suffers from the controversial psychological disorder DID. The rumors coming out of the scene are almost unbelievable. There are conflicting stories if the suspect is alive or dead after sustaining 2 point-blank gunshots. Reports even indicate one of his personalities is an amalgam of the various animals in the Philadelphia Zoo where he worked. The press is already referring to the alleged attacker by a dark name leaked by a source close to the case. Because of his many personalities, he is being called the Horde.
This is like that crazy guy in the wheelchair that they put away 15 years ago. And they gave him a funny name, too. What was it?
Mr. Glass.
That dialogue isn't stilted in the least. I withdraw all criticisms of all M. Night Shyamalan films. I apologize. Kidding. That's for the couple of emails I received these last few days, which told me I'd been a little bit overly harsh on the scene right before credits roll at the end of Split. That I said it seemed rather forced and stilted. And yeah, in retrospect, I'm gonna have to say, it is stilted as fuck. Also, how do reports that one of your personalities are an amalgam of zoo animals leak out? Who is responsible for that little information tidbit? And what kind of pseudoscience? I mean, like half the time these films want to be sort of grounded in the real world, a real world that can accommodate superheroes, but still, there are these lines of believability that you could just walk right up to them and then like, all right, let's stop just before we decide one of this guy's 24 personalities is an amalgam of zoo animals, because that makes no sense, even in Crazy Town. Even in the fun world of imagination and superheroes. Even in the Shyamalaniverse. So that was for all the Shyamalan apologists out there. There are more of them than I thought. Especially after I saw these reviews coming in for Glass, which I sadly concur with. I'm still not ready to talk about it. There's something else I'm not ready to talk about either. I've told you before on this podcast. I'm Matt Sager, by the way. Welcome to the show. I've spoken in the past about my philosophy and approach to doing this podcast. I'm going to be as transparent as possible, even when it reflects negatively on me, maybe especially so. Or if it's just something that I'm upset about. If it's not a legal issue, or if it's not going to start a war with someone who I think could hurt me. And even then, what I'm saying is transparency is really one of my mission statements. Comedy and entertainment being obviously much higher priorities. So last night, I aired a repeat of the Matt Sager podcast. You know, it was the day after. On Tuesday night, I had announced the nominees for the 2019 Academy Awards. And that news was great. It included 7 nominations for Black Panther, including Best Picture, making history as the first superhero movie to even be nominated for Best Picture. It's high time. The Academy could have done a better job of recognizing and honoring the art form about 10, 11 years ago when The Dark Knight was around. But Black Panther is certainly worthy. And to no longer have the genre, superhero films, comic films, be so very ghettoized and stigmatized. That's a big deal, whether or not it does end up taking home Best Picture. It's also nominated for 6 other categories of awards, so regardless, simply the acknowledgement is a wonderful thing. But last night, in contrast, I thought I'd just remind everybody that this year, as of now, it could change, but almost certainly won't. The Oscars will go without a host for the televised broadcast for the first time since 1989. Which was a disaster. However, I did not air the repeat because I thought it would be a timely reminder. You know, follow up one Oscar episode with another Oscar episode that's a little bit less enthusiastic and that reminds you of the potential pitfalls that this year's Academy Awards may face. Now, as a repeat, I did choose that episode for that reason, but before I did that, I recorded about a 30-minute episode on Pro Tools here in my home studio in New York City. And here's where the transparency part is important. The episode was about Bryan Singer, the allegations against him, the well-known and well-documented destructive behavior he's exhibited on various movie sets he's been involved with. You know, he was fired from Bohemian Rhapsody just 3 weeks before the movie wrapped because he was creating a toxic work environment. No one could stomach him anymore. And over the past year, some great journalists have done some digging up, speaking to many of his alleged victims, who were quite young, in their teens, usually early teens at the time Singer abused them sexually. You know, I grew up in New York City, specifically in Greenwich Village, about a block and a half away from the Stonewall. I've always been sort of blissfully free of some of the prejudices that, for instance, many people have had for decades with the gay community, with the LGBTQ community. My philosophy, by the time I was old enough to have one, was this: whatever consenting adults do with one another is fine. Why wouldn't it be? Seriously, in a civilized world, why wouldn't it be? However, I use the word victim to describe the kids who were abused allegedly by Bryan Singer because they were neither adults nor, in most cases, were they consenting. It was an incredibly upsetting show to do. And at the end, my blood was boiling and I was so angry, I didn't think it was entertaining. And as a result, I'm not going to talk that much about Bryan Singer tonight. I'm going to really get my thoughts together and really deal with the part of it that's, I don't know what to say exactly. I don't believe I was ever sexually abused as a kid. I was harassed in the workplace as a younger adult. But, I don't think this is in any way unique to me. You see these kind of news stories and the blood just begins to boil. So I'm going to take the night to really process all the Bryan Singer news that is out there. And, between tonight and tomorrow night, it's very possible that there will be more information about him. The most recent update is that despite all this news and all these new accusers coming forward and all this damning evidence and all these damning accusers who are just beginning to enter adulthood years after living with the PTSD that Bryan Singer left them with, that despite all of that, he is still on board as the director of Red Sonja, and that is obscene. Beyond that, I'll talk about tomorrow. Tonight, boy, there's just a depression scale in terms of what you're seeing in headlines. I don't think it gets a whole lot worse than underage sexual abuse. This certainly is nowhere near as bad as that, but it is bad. Today was a bad day to work in media. Thursday, January 24th, will live in infamy as Black Thursday by my decree. It's actually not a great time to be working at Tesla either, come to think of it. But first, here's a quiz. Little listicle for you. Little clickbait. Which of the 215 laid off BuzzFeed workers are you? That's right. That's how many people have been laid off from BuzzFeed as of now that I know of. This is troubling stuff. Huffington Post let a ton of workers go as well, as has Refinery 29, Vox Media, Mike. They're all just laying off people right and left. And Verizon Media is the biggest offender of the bunch so far that I'm aware of. They're laying off 7% of their staff. That includes a ton of people from Yahoo and, of course, the Huffington Post, which has had to let a ton of staffers go, including editorial staffers, and shuttering their entire German branch. HuffPo Deutschland is done as of now. It may return to us one day, but not in the current financial climate. The global economy, much of which exists in large part because of clickbait and this fast-paced social media sphere we're in. I'm not saying that technology has sent us down this path of laying people off. I would actually say something worse is at play here. That the catnip that these sites use to keep people like me and you clicking again and again and again, because it's all about the eyeballs, has been to treat politics and global affairs, including presidential races, national economies, government shutdowns. They have to treat these like a horse race. They need to stop short of delving into the real truths of it, going into detail and describing the ripple effect. Because what they really need, any website, and this should not apply to news sites, and I hope that going forward it won't anymore. But what they need is for us to be in a perpetual state of not necessarily panic, but a need to watch a certain story all day, every day. In the case of a presidential race, if covered right, they can get guaranteed eyeballs every day for years at a time. A large part of why the 2016 election went the way that it did was because media outlets from MSNBC to Fox to CNN to Huffington Post and BuzzFeed and more treated it like a game without any consequences. And those consequences have now come home. And they're not affecting any of the big executives at these firms so far that I'm aware of, but they're certainly affecting their staff, who I hope will try to enforce a more rigorous standard of reporting, if only to prevent another horrible set of days like the ones we've had yesterday and today, which started out with a bunch of people like, Huffington Post for one. All of these firings, or restructurings, perhaps is a more positive way to put it. But I think we should be brutally honest, because I've been told, I'm sorry, we're downsizing. It's not you, and also don't collect unemployment. So let's not put a pretty face on this. These are mass firings. And they happened so nearly concurrently with one another. Something big went down this week, clearly, because people at Verizon were reporting about their sister publications, their sister websites being canceled, even as memos were being typed just down the hall from editorial, letting these people know that they too were facing a huge round of layoffs. It's very sad. The media landscape going forward, I think it's going to appear to be as large. I just hope it's a little bit more wise in how it reports. Understand that this sort of news reporting, in which everything is a game with high stakes designed to get clicks, does have real-world consequences, not only for all of the world and its citizenry, but the writers themselves, the editors, their IT people, their secretaries and production assistants. This is really awful stuff. Verizon Media alone has laid off about 750 employees in one day. That is just unbelievable. BuzzFeed, meanwhile, has laid off 215 employees. which is actually being reported on quite responsibly. Articles covering the mass firing, such as the one I read today on the Chicago Tribune website, was very quick to say this has nothing to do with the article published about Michael Cohen last week. This isn't about Trump. This isn't about Michael Cohen. This isn't about the piece that BuzzFeed did on him, which was later rebuked, or pieces of it anyway, were disavowed by Robert Mueller. This has got nothing to do with that. This was going to happen regardless. Elon Musk, meanwhile, this is troubling. He sent out an email at 1:20 this morning, which is never great. You don't want your boss, your CEO, you don't want to have your VIP inbox make that alarming ding while you're trying to get a little bit of sleep. But the email began quite nicely, praising the company, its employees and their spirit, their vision for the future, and their hard work and ingenuity. He then went on to say, I apologize, but I'm going to have to cut about 7% of you. Whew. Musk says that these cuts are necessary so that Tesla can meet the unique challenges it faces, like, quote, making our cars, batteries, and solar products cost competitive with fossil fuels, which Musk went on to say are still too expensive for most people. Yeah, but you're going to need those employees. This is bad. I don't think that President Trump can really continue to claim, not that I ever thought he had a valid claim to this, but I mean now it's just going to be impossible for him to describe himself as the president with the least unemployment ever, the big jobs president. You know, as soon as the government shutdown went into effect, that narrative should have been thrown out the window. But today, it really should be. This is awful. Closer to my heart, you know, the truth is, at all of these organizations, I've got friends, and a couple of them are on these chopping blocks. That is also true of DC Comics, which they too laid off 3% of their staff today. Which, as far as numbers go, you know, you're reading about 215 at BuzzFeed, all of those hundreds of employees at the various branches of Verizon Media, 3 employees at DC Comics, heartbreaking though it is. Hardworking, dedicated, longtime soldiers that they are, many of whom left New York to go out to California when DC moved a year and a half ago. But at least it's only 7 people. Because right now we're talking about numbers in the hundreds that may end up spiraling into upwards of 1,000 at BuzzFeed, and especially at Verizon, which is already pushing quite close to 1,000 already. But those who have been made redundant, laid off, fired, however you want to put it, at DC Comics, per Variety, they include Senior VP of Sales Trade Marketing John Cunningham. Wow. When they start cutting these big executives, you know that something rather serious is going on. VP of Consumer Marketing, Eddie Scannell. And, oh my gosh, this one, this is painful. Senior VP Art Director, Mark Chiarello. He has been a soldier at DC for a very long time. The memo that they received yesterday at DC Comics' new headquarters. I know, it's been out there for over a year. I still consider it their new headquarters because I remember when they were all in New York and when I used to work in the same building as them. And I'd go up to my radio job at Westwood One, and my buddies at DC Comics would disembark the elevator, and depending on whether they worked for the Mad branch or the DC Comics branch, the walls would be decorated either with these beautiful paintings of the Justice League or lots of funny paintings of Alfred E. Newman. And naive Matt, who thought, oh my God, I've gone into radio and it's awful. Is this what adult life is like? No. I bet they're really happy working at DC Comics. Meanwhile, all those people were getting ulcers too, as I later learned as I befriended them. Business is business. Business is vicious, exhausting, and uncertain in just about any medium, I'm very sad to say. So the memo that was circulated at DC yesterday, it was written by the president of Warner Brothers Global Brands and Experiences, a woman named Pam Lifford. Quote, we recognize and appreciate that all of our employees have made considerable contributions to our business and that it has been difficult to lose colleagues, many of whom have been here for a long time and have made an important impact on DC. We thank them for their hard work and dedication to DC. As always, we are committed to taking care of our employees and will be as thoughtful as possible with those who are impacted by these changes. Well, it is nice to put lipstick on a pig, but a pig it is. And each of these companies is suffering for a different set of reasons. What they all have in common is that the global economy is just really in awful shape right now. The uncertainty, as always, I'm trying very hard to be apolitical, but really, the reason things are so volatile is that many countries, led by the one true superpower in the world, the United States, are in free fall. They have leaders who are quite erratic, whose future is in question, and who has spent obscene amounts of their nation's capital on follies, on projects that make no sense, from their own internal corruption to these crazy hostage-taking kind of meetings, and the over 1 month long now government shutdown over this stupid wall. So that certainly is a factor. But when I think of DC in particular, it's very difficult to me to speak ill of the company. I certainly don't mean this to reflect on anyone there, any one entity. But, the other day it was announced that DC has cut their line of comics in half over the last year. I think that might have been too little too late. I think that the comics market in general is just horrifically oversaturated. And I've never really understood how that plays out, how that affects people. Like, DC is owned by Warner Brothers, which gives them a nice corporate umbrella under which to reside. Similarly, Marvel for the past several years has been owned by Disney, who could buy Australia tomorrow easily and still have money to pay most of their employees if they wanted. But these comics publishers, especially post-2015, it had really begun a few years before then. But around 2015, I began to notice in my trips to my local comic shop, such as they were, or browsing on sites like Comixology for digital comics, that it's obscene how many books are being published and how much quantity is prized over quality in many, many instances. So you can have 9 Batman titles out in 1 week. Not anymore, obviously, but at that time, say 2016, 2017, when many of today's events began being set in motion, almost certainly unknowingly. But if you're charging anywhere between $3 and $5 for a comic, and you're telling any dedicated Batman fan that to remain up to date on what's going on with Batman, you need to buy the Batman comic, Detective Comics, Justice League. Marvel is a far greater offender as far as this goes. They continue to pump out ridiculous amounts of comics, many of which just don't sell, get canceled, and then reinstated a few months later with the same creative team. Nothing changed. But I've wondered for a while now why comics have chosen, it seems, because many of these editors are the same people who were in charge when comics was thriving. So I question why they or their corporate overseers are so intent on comics being such a loss leader. I mean, sure, obviously the movie divisions, at least at Marvel to be sure, are going to take precedence, are going to make more money for Disney than Marvel Comics. And yet, where does the Marvel Cinematic Universe come from? It's from ideas, stories, and concepts from Marvel Comics, obviously. So why they would take this moment, when they're the largest cinematic franchise in history, to make these comics frightening to get into as a new fan? Because again, if you want to follow Thor, you need to pick up 2 or 3 books there. Spider-Man, 8 or 9 books. And while I certainly applaud the hiring of all these up-and-coming artists, some of them are being picked up a little bit too soon for some major marquee books. And so I'll be very surprised if in the next week or so, as these companies continue to announce their various layoffs, I'd be amazed if Marvel doesn't cut at least a little staff, or at the very least do what DC started doing a year ago and start trimming down those monthly titles. Like, focus on however many you can focus on so that they're all great, worth reading, and that they become must-reads, not because, oh my gosh, if I don't pick up these 10 books, I won't know what Spider-Man's doing. That only serves to scare customers away, or even offend lifelong customers who are now in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and cause them to walk away. It's like cleaning house, literally. You don't decide, all right, I'm going to go up to the attic and fix all that awful stuff that's been piling up there for the last decade. You say, all right, I'm going up to the attic and I'm going to pick 100 books to throw out. I'm going to pick 1 wall to dust, 1 molding to clean the, mold off of. You do it in pieces. And in doing so, maybe understand what it's been like for the consumers who walk into comic shops and every Wednesday see 900 titles staring at them and are left baffled, befuddled, confused, and sort of turned off. If they browse and the art and or writing is subpar, all those titles on the stands mean nothing. An audience is not guaranteed. And frankly, having these booming cinematic universes, again, obviously Marvel's is booming much more than DC's, but DC is on their way. They should be taking this time to produce the best comics they've ever produced, not to become lazy loss leaders as they seem to be at the moment. I really don't want to come back here a few days from now and do another podcast about, 300 more friends of mine got laid off today. I am frankly sick of those kind of stories. So be you a Huffington Post news site, a BuzzFeed sort of listicle hub that also publishes very serious news, or a comics publisher. Try to practice business as wisely as possible. Try to not be reckless, but to be bold with your storytelling. Now, fortunately, podcasts, it's all uphill from here. There are so few of us. It's a big, wide open market and very easy to break into, and I'm having no problems at all. No layoffs in my future here at the Matt Sager Podcast that I know of. So get in touch with me. You can email matt@mattsager.com or call 646-535-4788. You can also get me on social media, where on Twitter, I'm at Matt Sager. On Instagram, I'm Real Matt Sager. And on Facebook, let's see. My personal page is The Matt Sager. My voiceover page is Matt Sager VO. And this podcast's page is Matt Sager Podcast. Also, check out the links in the description for tonight's podcast episode for links to my Patreon, patreon.com/Matt Sager, and my merch store for my good friends at wehavemerch.com. You can get Matt Sager podcast t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, stickers, and more. And for everything else, my voiceover reels and contact information, archive back episodes of this very podcast, articles, blog posts, and more. You can find all that at my website, mattsagervoiceover.com.